This is Jim Lowe. He is our board chair, and he is going to be introducing Kevin. Thank you all for coming, and it is such a pleasure to see each and every one of you here.
Thanks, Kate, and welcome everyone to another version of our 2023 Distinguished History Lecture Series. I'm very excited about tonight's speaker, but before I introduce our speaker for this evening, I do want to mention one other housekeeping item. If you have a Facebook account, we would sure appreciate you following our two pages. We have a Baker Mansion page, which will give you all that information about the events at the mansion, many of which, as Kate indicated, are free. And
We'll speak into the mic because I can't hear out there.
okay. See, I'm used to having a big mouth, so
Go ahead and take it off the stand.
right, Jen? Okay.
There we go.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize. So let me just recap what I was saying. If you have a Facebook account, we sure would appreciate you liking and following our two pages. One page is the Baker Mansion page, which has information about events at the mansion and other activities we do there. Many are free, as Kate mentioned, and we would appreciate anytime you want to come out and enjoy those events, please join us. We also have a second page titled Blair County Historical Society, and that page also has announcements about events, but it also has information about Blair County history. Recently, I started a Trivia Tuesday, a Where Are We Wednesday, and a Photo Friday. So there's each week some items you can explore there to learn more about Blair County history. So, on to our 2023 lecture series. Before I get started, I do want to mention that our next lecture is July, and that is Harriet Gaston, and she'll be speaking about the Underground Railroad in Blair County. Very fascinating topic, so I hope to see you join us then. I will note that all of our previous speakers this year, our three previous speakers for the 2023 lecture series, are all in attendance tonight, so I thank them for previously participating, and I hope to see you once again. I spent 33 years in the classroom at Altoona High School as a history teacher, and I can tell you it was always exciting when I had a student who walked into my room already excited about history. That made the job much easier of teaching them about our country's heritage and history, and it was good to see students that were enthusiastic. It was rare, though, to find a student who walked in the room who was doing their own research. And that's what we have this evening. Kevin Stiver has spent the last 9 months completing research on Glen White, which in his book he titles it A Town That's Been Forgotten. Thanks to his research, that will no longer be the case. Now, I did ask Kevin, as he's entering his sophomore year at Bellwood Annis High School, what he likes to do beyond researching history. And I understand why that's number one. Trust me, it's my number one also. But his answers, I thought, were very telling. And he gave answers typical of a teenager in saying that he enjoys the outdoors and hunting and fishing, correct?
Yep.
But he also said, and I thought this was such a fantastic answer, he enjoys spending time with family. And you don't get a fine young man like this without surrounding him with good family. So if you're a part of Kevin's family and you're here tonight, would you please raise your hand so we can give you some a nice round of applause to acknowledge that? So with that, I would like to introduce our featured speaker tonight, Kevin Stiver, on the town of Glen White.
Thanks very much, Jim. And I'm very excited to be talking about this. I've been looking forward to this since we set this up in February. And so a little bit about myself. I'm 15 years old. I started this when I was 14 years old in August of 2022, and I just completed it and printed a book, 75-page book on Glen White, Pennsylvania. Glen White's not the only history I'm interested in. I collect local pieces of history, postcards from the area. So let's get started on Glen White. So everybody's been here. I'm sure a lot of the people in attendance tonight have been to the world-famous Horseshoe Curve. And that is where Glen White was 2 miles from the back of this picture through the tunnel. It started around the time that the curve was built, 1854, Brian and Mary Kelly lived in Tyrone, Ireland, and they moved to Tyrone, Pennsylvania, coincidentally. Now, they moved to Glen White when Brian Kelly won a raffle, and his prize was a horse. Well, he didn't need a horse, so he got rid of it and traded it for this 20 acres of land that is on the other side of the Horseshoe Curve. This is the main road today. And the conditions of this property was there was not to be, let's see here. There was not to be any coal or saloons built on this 20 acres. So the yellow box is that 20 acres. So they built the Glen White branch of the railroad off the Horseshoe Curve around the time the curve was built. And the original purpose of the railroad was for sawmills and cutting the timber all the way back so far. And during that time, they discovered that there was good rich coal in the ground located around the curve. So the coal rights were sold to a group of men named Glen White, giving the town name Glen White, Pennsylvania. So the actual operations were started by this man named Jacob H. Taylor from Baltimore. He began in the early 1870s, and that's a picture of him there. And he owned mines in Glitzen as well, as his company grew to the Taylor and McCoy Company. Taylor and McCoy was the company that a Hollidaysburg resident, David McCoy, went into business partners with Taylor when he went from driving canal boats in Hollidaysburg to working in Bennington to going to Glen White and working his way up to the company to the top and growing mine operations. So in the mines, they use a lot of these tools. Up here in the top left, we have a miner's cap with a carbide light strapped on top of it, and this is a carbide light here. And a carbide light was used when carbide and water would interact. They would produce this flame on the end of the carbide. And dynamite sticks, they would work their way through the mine with dynamite. The center picture there is a pick and shovel. You had to get through the coal somehow. And a mine cart, which was not very high because the coal veins were only, I've heard, 27 inches or more. It just depended on what was being mined. There was a clay mine. If you've ever gone from the Horseshoe Curve up the Glen White Road, you'll see yellow bricks on the left-hand side of the road. And I've always been asked, what are these? And that is the Clay Tipple Foundation. So that is where they mine clay. And if you look on the other side of the road in the winter months, you can see where the railroad bed breaks off, comes across the road, goes behind the coal tipple, and back on. So that is that's a common question I hear. So it was a kind of build it and they will come scenario. They started constructing company housing, and along with a school and a church and coke ovens. Now, coke ovens are the ruins of the town that you might see in the woods during the fall through early spring. These are the coke ovens today. I took these just a couple months ago. They were built in the 1880s, shortly after McCoy and Taylor went into business partnership. And the coke was used in the steel mills in Pittsburgh and Johnstown to melt steel. Coal did not work as well. Coal from the mines was placed into the coke ovens. It was burned to a certain degree, and they would take it out and put it in carts and send it on its way, and it would burn hundreds of degrees hotter than coal ever did. There was 100 coke ovens built on the Glen White land. These pictures were taken almost 100 years apart. The picture on the left here was taken in 1925 of the first couple coke ovens, and this structure right here is the coal tipple. This picture was taken just a few weeks ago in the same exact spot, and you can see what nature has done to the coke ovens. Now that structure is actually the background of this presentation. This is the coal tipple. Coal will be brought into the back of this building and dropped down this chute where you can see these two openings right here that it would dump into cars, trucks, or bigger coal cars, and it would be taken to the Horseshoe Curve to be shipped out across the United States. This is a 1938 aerial view that was taken. This is the Horseshoe Curve, and this is the coal tipple in relation to the curve. This is the original road plan that's still in use today, where you can see the perspective, the amount of rail used from the tipple all the way down to the Horseshoe Curve. And it was loaded in this vicinity before it was just used for coal trucks, and the tipple there was tore down. These are kind of the style of company homes they had at Glen White. This is the Harilla and Kelly house. And if you're ever going toward Glitzen, on the right-hand side, there's a clearing with a gate, just about 2 miles up the road. This is where that house sit. So this was house number 5. And the houses were split, and you had to live with a different family. And so much money was taken out of the miner's paycheck and used for monthly rent, anywhere from $2 to $8, just depended on how many home occupants you had. And the corner, this is the corner of the company store. And the company store, you might have seen the postcards for sale out in the lobby. This was the Taylor Trading Company, named after the founder, Jacob Taylor. And it was, if you're looking down towards the Horseshoe, in that vicinity, still remnants are still there. And this would be the second bridge you would pass over today. So Glen White had a school and church. They were built side by side. This picture I got off of Joan Eckenlob, who was actually in this picture right in front of this car. So this church and the school, these two buildings right here are outhouses, a girls' and a boys' outhouse that were added on to the school. Now, the school was tore down in 1937 as all the students from the Glen White School were then taken to Edison School, just a couple miles down the road. And you can see the dismantling process of the school here. It's hard to believe that at one time there were once 44 grade schools in Logan Township. Now, just beyond this building right here, a matter of 8 feet, we found 3 burials. If you came to the April presentation, Jim Snyder talked about these. And my Pat found these in middle of January. And we were able to identify that the 2 up top are a man and woman, and this is another man buried so far down. The corner of the school, like I said, was 8 feet away from these graves. One has been identified as Peter Kolak, who died in 1910 of blood poisoning, and he only lived at Glen White for 30 days. And that is where he was placed. These are the graves, my pap here, who the discoverer of the graves, you could say. You could see how they're in line to each other in relation to the ground. I've talked to many town residents who still are living today, ages ranging from early 70s to late 90s, and they have never known that these graves existed. So this is the company engine that they used. The coke ovens are there on the left, and just before you get to that clearing on the right-hand side, they had an engine house so that they would keep the engine. Now this bigger engine was taken from Glen White to the Horseshoe Curve, and the engines were shared between Baker's Mines, which was in the next hollow over, and Glen White. They had various engines to use there. This is an aerial view of Glen White, taken from 1938 that I zoomed in. It is in my book. Now, a lot of these buildings are identified, and you can see where the church and school are here, the store, and this is the Horilla house that I mentioned, and the coal tipple. And a lot of people see the yellow gate there on the, would be right in here. That was the old railroad bed that wrapped up around the houses and came back to the tipple. Many people lived up above, and there was about 10 houses there, and just a few houses on this side of the road. The high up company had their own house, so they didn't share a house. They had their own house. It was bigger. Some of the houses there had the only houses that had running water on the left-hand side of the road. The foundation is still there of one of the houses, and I've been able to identify who lived there and how long they lived there. This is what the aerial view looks like today. The Altoona Water Authority placed watersheds there to clean up the mine drainage that goes to the reservoirs, and that's another reason why Glen White closed its doors. This would be right in the area where we found the graves, and the school would be. So this is that clearing with the gate. So if in relation, if you look catty corner across the road, you can see a pair of steps that we put in to access the graves, and you can go up there and visit them yourself. And this store was here, and the company railroad wrapped this way. You came down to the tipple, which is right in here. So the closing of Glen White. In 1938, the coal company, the Glen White Coal and Lumber Company was the name of the company, closed because of company debt. They couldn't pay correct mining wages and couldn't pay their taxes correctly. So they filed for bankruptcy. The company went up for voluntary receivership. That means whoever wanted it got it. So the same people got it back, opened up a new company called the Glen White Coal Works, and they got a loan from a financing agency. Things were good. They opened up a new mine with, and the town population was going up, and the mines were shut down for actually 18 months during this time. So it took them a while to get back on their feet, but when things were started to go good again, they didn't pay anything on their loan. So the refinancing agency claimed it, went up for sheriff's sale, and M. Gloucester Brothers in Johnstown bought the land, scrapped the rails, the engines, and everything, and it was sold to the Water Authority for $1,300. So when the town closed, they told all the town residents, take what you want. We don't want it. So they took a lot of their houses that were on the Glen White property, moved them down the road or to Blitzen and re-erected new houses. Now, they don't look like the houses that were there, but if you go from Matzek's transmission shop all the way to the breast of the first reservoir, you can see a lot of the houses look the same. So they followed kind of the same blueprint. And a lot of the houses were used from Glen White pieces of Glen White houses. So this is why it looks like that today. That's why we have watersheds instead of a thriving coal company and a community of 250 people. Now, I'm going to go back to the aerial view. This area right here close to where we found the graves, there was a logging company mine, logged from here down. So if the logging company went more than 20 yards, they would have went right over the graves. Now, there was a boarding house there. A boarding house was more or less a company hotel that if you were cutting through Pennsylvania and you were looking for work for the weekend, you stayed in a boarding house and for so much money, and they fully equipped bedrooms, beds. I read a thing that said 12 bedrooms on each floor. So many people stayed here. Many people came and gone. And this house right here was the very first house built at Glen White, which was the Kelly House, built in 1854. And it still stood till the end of Glen White. Now, there was people who lived down below Glen White, the de Gaulles, the de Gaulle organization. They originated from Glen White. They lived right below Glen White, and they had their own mine called the Rusty Loudon Mine. And they had a big house. It's hard to keep 13 people in a house with 2 bedrooms for 9 boys. And they lived there until the 1950s because their house was not really on Glen White property. It was on their own property. So they were able to stay open about 10 years longer than Glen White did. So after that, things started growing up. The watersheds were put in, and Glen White was slowly slipping away. So this, for the past 10 months, I've been researching on this, talking to many town residents I can. Here's how I look at it. 25 years from now, if somebody were to write a book about Glen White, you wouldn't have any town residents to talk to that remember anything. Glen White residents, such as Lino de Gaulle and Sam de Gaulle, who are 94 and 96, are not going to be here in 25 years to tell information. So in this book, Lino's de Gaulle's maps that he drew based off of memory and are key onto this aerial view are in the book, telling each building who lived where, how long they lived there, how many was in each house, what they paid for rent, what the house occupation was. And it shows you what these people lived through. There was horrible deaths multiple times, and people getting run over by trains, or like a Western shootout, you know, in the main streets of Glen White. And it's just amazing how much stuff has gone on 80 years ago in the woods of Glen White. The only thing that remains of Glen White today are the stones and the memories. And if I didn't do this, sooner or later, there wouldn't be anything left. So, does anybody have any questions?
One of the first things you said was no coal and no saloons.
Yes.
So how did they do the coal if there was a stipulation?
So on their 20 acres, they were not allowed to mine that coal.
So they bought.
So they started right along the 20 acres, and they figured if we're going to do this, we can't do it here. So they moved it across the road, and that was their main
So
mine.
they bought additional property.
Yes, they did. Any other questions?
How did you first become aware of Glen White, you personally?
This guy right here, my pap. So we were taking a ride up Katanning Point Road one day, and I pointed out the coke ovens and I said, "Pap, what are those?" He said, "Those are the coke ovens. I understand there was a town here at one point." And he said, "I'm not really sure how things worked with the coke organization, but I know it's here." And he's known people that live there who are now passed away. So I wanted to learn more because I thought it was very interesting to me that the road that we travel almost every weekend that I'm with him, this was here. So I expanded my research, and it was 10 months in the making, and here we are.
Any theories why there's no house number 10?
That I'm not sure of. I've always wondered that because in the last census is listed in the Glen White book that I wrote. And it goes 9A, 9B, 9C, 11. Nobody must have been home. I don't know. So there's no information for a house 10. Any other questions?
I just want to add two things. Number one, you saw the photograph of the store there. We had for the Historical Society a postcard made in which the photograph is colorized. So if that's something that would be a nice compliment to Kevin's book, you can buy those in our table outside, and it really helps us. It helps us with our expenses. And number two, having sat through countless student presentations during my career, few were anywhere close to as good as this is. This was excellent. It was A+, and I certainly want to thank Kevin for doing a super job.
Thank you. So I want to give a shout out to the guy who's really helped me along the way, Jim Snyder in the back, who's printed all the books that I've sold and given me hundreds of newspaper articles. So I was going to start out as a little book, a piece of paper folded in half, 20-page booklet on Glen White. And I went to him and I said, "Do you have any information on Glen White?" And he said, hundreds and hundreds of newspaper clippings. So I figured this is not going to be a 20-page book. So I went through him, and it grew and grew with pictures and more information I got off of people, and it turned into a 75-page book.
Question over there.
What are you going to do next?
Take a break. But I plan on writing about the Katanning Indian Trail that ran through here. In the Sugar Run 58th Street area, actually through the Horseshoe Curve, through Glen White to Asheville, Chest Springs, clear to Katanning, PA. From Katanning to Shirleysburg, Pennsylvania.
Tell
That's my
about
next
your
project.
Facebook, whatever that is.
Yeah, I have a Facebook page, Altoona, Pennsylvania History. I don't know if anybody's looked at that. I'm sure there's a couple. And I started that in November of 2020, and it's now has 5,500 followers. So
Wow.
it's grown and grown. Question?
We're all descendants of our parents grew up there. I want to know who, if they could put their hands up, who else parents grew up there? Oh, three of them, yeah. That's cool.
Any family members who from Glen White? Raise your hand. So this presentation, I was hoping if you knew they were from Glen White, you could come to this presentation and kind of get an idea of what was there if you couldn't actually talk to them. So this is another reason why I did this presentation. Any other questions?
What's the chances of getting a group together and go up there and maybe look at different sites?
I've thought about that. See, in next month, July 22nd, I'll have a book signing at Horseshoe Curve. And I called the water authority and said, it would be great to use that little cleared out area for a book signing at the scene of Glen White. But they said, oh, liability. So they said they're okay with anybody walking on the property of Glen White. So that's quite possible. We'll have to look into it. The Game Commission owns on the left side of the road so far back.
Yeah, we'll give you permission to go on the right side.
Yeah. Yep. Any other questions? Yeah.
Any records of like a freight station for the railroad?
The closest station would have been Katanning Point Station, which was on the right side of the Horseshoe Curve. Let me go back to this aerial view here. You can see the Horseshoe Curve. I can point it out for you. If you collect postcards, it's quite a common postcard. So the Katanning Point Station is right there. That's the nearest station, Glen White.
Right beside in the front.
Yeah, this would have been back this hall is Baker's. So this is what they shared. Elias Baker. That was his mom. So they shared the company engines between each hall. So the train went from here, back, got coal, back, here, there, back, across, and loaded it on. Any other questions? Jim?
Were they narrow gauge?
Yes, they were narrow gauge. To and from the mines were narrow gauge, but from Glen White to the curve was just standard gauge.
The whole family is very large. They're very large. International company, actually.
Yeah.
You mentioned that they had property there. Oh. Did you think that they were wealthy then, or did they get their start in lumber or coal?
So the lumber company, 7Ds in Blitzen, they call it 7Ds because 7 of the 9 de Gaulle brothers went together and formed the company. The head guy was Bruno, and Bruno's dad was the mine leaser. He leased the mine. So the de Gaulles actually lived closer towards the stream. They lived really in the middle of the road right now. But and then they moved it up after a flood. So on this sharp turn, I'll show you where de Gaulles lived. De Gaulles lived right here. And this was their mine. And they had a thing like the Horseshoe Curve now. One went up, one came down, and they crossed in the middle. So that's how they got coal to and from there. And this oval there, the truck went in, got the coal, went down the road. So I would say, yeah, they're pretty wealthy.
When you say Bruno, do you mean senior that's deceased or?
Yes, senior. He grew up there at Glen White.
Did everybody that lived there do mining, or would there have been other occupations going on?
There were,
Great grandfather was born there, and his father was a blacksmith.
yeah, there were many other jobs to do. Gus Helsing was a storekeeper, and he lived just below the Horseshoe Curve until 1943 when he passed away. There was coal dumpers. There was a weighman. The weighman is one of the most important jobs. You gave the value of every miner's paycheck. See, they paid miners by the ton of coal they took out of the mine. So to be a weighman, that's pretty important. So there were plenty of other things to do just beside mining at Glen White. Questions? Any other questions?
The Blair County Conservation District was involved in that, what you were calling the watersheds, the runoff abatement project. Did you talk with them at all? That they may have done some research on the area, I'm not sure.
I can't remember if I did.
Okay.
I talked to so many people over the last 10 months.
would be the name of the person at Conservation District.
Okay. Okay, I'll have to look into that.
Okay.
Questions?
I always thought that the reason Glen White shut down was because of the water. The water was so bad. So it's actually they went bankrupt?
Yes.
That's the main reason?
Yes, they didn't pay their loan. So pollution was a very, very difficult thing at Glen White. So just by this house, there was a stable at one time. And the creek's right there. And they said, let's put the manure pile right beside the stable. When it rained, it went straight into the creek and down to the reservoir. So the water authority was really on them. And at one time when Glen White was getting its start, the water authority said, we just ought to buy them out so they can't expand anymore. Well, they didn't. And it just kept going. So pollution was very, it wasn't a good thing for them. But it really didn't affect them much as they're paying their bills. So
After the school closed, and those that wanted to attend school had to go to Edison.
yes,
I don't know how they got there.
bus.
They got a bus?
They got a bus. They actually caught the bus at those yellow bricks at the clay tipple. So they got onto there, turned around, and went down to Edison School. Any other questions? Here.
Comment. Kind of a secret, probably not many people know it, but the abatement, the pollution, where across the road went on up, they started cleaning that up around, I think 1990. And I know, I go up there a lot, to the bridge right, Glen White, there was trout. They did stock them.
Oh yeah.
Since they put the abatement in, during COVID, I used to walk to my house up there.
Mhm.
I saw blue heron one day. So the next time I came up, which is odd because it's dead.
Yeah.
Next time I went up, I talked to the watershed manager. She was up there doing the testing. I'm like, hey, this is clean enough for today. It should be down to the place where there's nothing in. Well, then I started looking. There's not a lot, but there's trout the whole way down to where the chute,
Yeah.
the stone chute goes in. It's that lower bridge.
Yeah.
First one you drive. If you sneak up along there, be careful. Walk slow. You'll see them dark.
I've spent hours over the past 10 months trying to catch a fish, but just catch it moving, just looking. But they're scarce. They used to be stocked, but everybody would just fish them out and take them home. So
From what talking to her, those ones came down on their own. They didn't stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a list of like occupancy, like what was the highest occupancy at the time, or when they started to evacuate? Did some stay behind for a while, or
yeah.
they all evacuated at the same time?
So when the water authority bought Glen White, they said, you got a year to figure out what you're doing. If you're not out by a year, we're going to take you out ourselves. So people stayed a couple weeks till the deadline. It just varied on what they wanted to do. They, like I said, it could take them a while to tear down their house and put it back together down the road. So they took anything they could.
What year was that? That they
19,
bought them out?
1941, and they closed down in 1942.
And I want to know the occupancy. You know, like was there like 300 at one time?
Maximum was 250. The population really varied because there were so many people that were coming and going. Permanent residents, I would say 200. The 50 added on would be the boarding house residents coming and going. In the book, there is the final census taken of Glen White. So there's not a house number 1 listed because house number 1 was the boarding house. So, any other questions? Nope. Okay, well, you can speak to me one-on-one after this presentation if you want to. Books are for sale in the hallway, $20, and I'll be glad to sign your book if you get one. And thanks for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it.